the informed show for an intelligent audience.
Welcome, you're watching Gravitas with me, Molly Gambhir. Here's a look at what's lined up for you on the show tonight. Our cover story tonight is about a diplomatic coup, one that could change the dynamics in West Asia. China has played peacemaker in West Asia. It has brokered talks between Iran and Saudi Arabia. Two sworn enemies are set to put their differences aside. What do these developments mean for the region? What does this mean for America's so-called dominance in the region? What does it mean for India? Tonight on Gravitas, we decode the biggest global development of the day. Also on the show for you tonight, we tell you about a murky alliance between the Chinese Communist Party, the Italian mafia and Russian oligarchs. It is a network involving underground banks. We tell you more. India has reported its first H3N2 influenza deaths. The virus has killed 2 people as the country tackles a rise in flu cases. The Taliban governor has been killed in a blast. We tell you about the rise of extreme forces in the country. The discovery of a game-changing room temperature superconductor, a breakthrough claim that has far-reaching implications for the energy crisis and the fight against climate change. We begin the show tonight with a breakthrough story that could prove to be a turning point in West Asia, a story that could change the region's geopolitical dynamics. This is what I am talking about. Iran and Saudi Arabia, 2 sworn enemies, are now friends again. That's right. The 2 arch rivals have agreed to mend ties and put their differences aside after 7 years of hostility. This is a huge development with far-reaching implications. And what makes it even more interesting is the country that has brokered this truce. China. Riyadh and Tehran are normalizing their relations as part of an agreement mediated by Beijing. According to reports, talks between the 2 sides had been ongoing in Beijing since the 6th of March. And 4 days later, these talks have proven fruitful. And how? This is what Iran's state news agency has said, citing a joint statement. I'm quoting, as a result of the talks, Iran and Saudi Arabia agreed to resume diplomatic relations and reopen embassies within 2 months. After implementing the decision, the foreign ministers of both the countries will be meeting to prepare for the exchange of ambassadors. This agreement, if it comes to a conclusion, could have wide-reaching implications vis-à-vis Iran's nuclear deal and the civil war in Yemen, where the 2 sides are locked in a proxy war. But the biggest highlight of this story is China's involvement. Its role as a broker, as a peacemaker, is striking to say the least. It could strengthen China's diplomatic position further simply because it has done something even America could not do. It has brought together the two biggest players in West Asia, 2 countries that until recently could not even see eye to eye. For decades, they have fought for dominance and waged proxy wars. And now, all of a sudden, they are trying to bury the hatchet. A couple of questions are bound to emerge here. What's behind the thaw between Iran and Saudi Arabia? What brought them to the negotiating table? Also, why were they fighting in the first place? Is their rivalry religious or political or both? And how will this latest development change the region? Let me start with the rivalry. The roots of Saudi Arabia's rivalry with Iran are often sought in a 1,000-year-old religious schism between Sunnis and Shias. The two main branches of Islam, Iran and Saudi Arabia, are on the opposing sides of this split. But it's important to not overstate this split because this rivalry is also political. Just have a look at the proxy wars. In Syria, Saudi Arabia backs the rebel groups. It provides them generous military and financial assistance. Iran does the opposite. It supports the Assad regime in fighting the rebel groups backed by Riyadh. In Lebanon, Iran supports the Hezbollah, a Shia militant group. Saudi Arabia, in fact, has for the longest time supported the Lebanese government to take on the Hezbollah. And then we have Yemen, where Iran supports the Houthi rebels, a Shia militia group fighting the regime. Saudi Arabia, along with a coalition of Arab nations, helps the regime strike the Houthis. And now that the two are about to become friends, all these campaigns could come to an end. The question is, why? What really led to this thaw? You see, Iran's reasons are largely economic. US sanctions are crushing its economy. Restoring ties with the second largest economy in West Asia will help Iran broaden regional trade, also reach out to several Sunni majority countries. For Saudi Arabia, the reasons are both economic and political. Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman is trying to diversify the economy. And remember, for that, he needs to change his country's image. A de-escalation with Iran could spell an end to the proxy wars and help MBS attract investments. He needs money to realize his much-touted Vision 2030. So at the end of the day, this warming up of ties is more about money than anything else. Whatever be the case, this development will have serious implications in West Asia. And to discuss this, I'm joined by Iran analyst and CEO of Carpo think tank, Adnan Tabatabai, along with foreign policy analyst Everett P. Joseph, a senior fellow at the Johns Hopkins University. Adnan, let me begin with you. What is your initial reaction to this huge development and the fact that China has made this possible, something that the US has not been able to do for the longest time?
Well, I have to say that the China dimension here is a big surprise, I have to admit. So what is not a surprise is that Iran and Saudi Arabia are finding a pathway towards resuming diplomatic ties and taking a further step towards rapprochement. We have had 3 years of talks being held in Iraq and Oman. So this process has been going on for quite some time. It started in April 2020. But apparently last year in fall, during Xi Jinping's visit to Saudi Arabia, and then later President Ibrahim Raisi's visit to China in February, this process of elevating these talks from a regional format being hosted by Iraq and Oman to a, let's say, global format by having China as the host of the finalization of this process, this has come as a surprise, I have to say. So this is the, let's say, surprising bit, while the essence of the news of today has been in the making for some time.
And it is a surprise that the US will not be very happy about, Edward. What does this really mean for America's so-called dominance in this part of the world?
But we need to really apply perspective on this before rushing to all sorts of conclusions. The U.S. role in the Middle East is one of American disinterest. The U.S. has been trying to move out and away from the Middle East for years, ever since the reaction to the Iraq War in the United States under President Obama, the famous pivot to Asia. This is the pivot to confront Chinese expansionism in Asia. So we have to put this in perspective. This isn't some kind of competition where the U.S. seeks greater influence in the Middle East and China has somehow elbowed it out. The U.S. has not. And that's number one. Number two is we have to remember that China and the United States do not approach the Middle East from the same standpoint. China doesn't care about what happens internally in these countries. China doesn't care that Iran kills protesters, peaceful protesters, perhaps even poisoning girls in schools. China doesn't care about that. China doesn't care that Jamal Khashoggi was murdered in a consulate, Saudi consulate in Turkey. So China operates on money. So as your report, as you yourself indicated, and so that makes things very easy. If you're operating purely on money, you can have strategic partnership with Iran. You can have great investment with the Saudis, and you have an entree. And it really, in fact, is sort of surprising that it's, in my view, that China has taken this long to really establish any type of political profile in the region, if we think about it. And the other thing is, of course, is the United States has no diplomatic relations with Iran. So since 1979, since the revolution. So again, we have to put this in perspective. The last thing we have to do is put in perspective about this famous breakthrough. Look, it's not for nothing that Saudi and Iran have had such tortured relations for the past years. It's not just some whimsical difference in personalities or something between Iranian and Saudi leaders. They have very sharp differences, and it remains to be seen whether an agreement brokered by China that probably has money attached to it will actually last. What will actually happen in Yemen? What will the Iranian role in Syria be? These are the types of roles that Iran has played that have threatened Saudi and threatened Saudi's Gulf neighbors and produced these tensions. So, yes, it's significant. I don't want to say it's not, but we have to keep this all in some kind of perspective before rushing to a conclusion that this is somehow kind of new geopolitical era that we're in. We're not yet there. Please.
Adnan, how do you react to that? And also, can you tell us more about what we know about what went on behind the scenes for this truce to really happen?
No, I think I would agree that we have to obviously wait and see. We have to wait and see whether the 2 months period that is outlined in the joint statement, which is a hell lot of time in this part of the world, a lot of things can happen. And if we look at some of the reactions to this piece of news, partly coming from DC, I'm not talking about officials here, I'm talking about some on the think tank scene, there will be states, there will be non-state actors that will, from today onwards, put every effort into trying to torpedo this because of their very own geopolitical interests. I do share the assessment that China doesn't care about internal affairs in this region. But if we're honest, the U.S. doesn't either, as long as its regional or geopolitical interests are met. Even if you know who is the perpetrator behind the targeted killing abroad, is not going to be held. Relations to that country may be somewhat, I'm talking about Saudi Arabia here, maybe somewhat negative, but the partnership continues because of U.S. interests. And I'm not saying that it's an illegitimate thing to be interest-driven, but I would really say that, in fact, for China, it's, of course, economic interests, but it's also the issue of energy security. For China, it's crucial not to have too explosive region in the Strait of Hormuz in the Persian Gulf to balance its relations to key energy suppliers in the region. So it's more than just economy, it's also security interests. I cannot speak about what has happened behind the scenes. I think that there will have been serious talks between Iran and Saudi Arabia about the different contexts, be it Yemen, be it Syria, Iraq, and Lebanon, where these two countries have had opposing interests. And your other guest is correct in saying this rivalry has been for a reason, and the competition and rivalry will continue. It's impossible to imagine these two not being rivals, but it is possible that there is a modus vivendi between them, that there are some arrangements, and maybe we can speak about the different countries and the contexts. But yeah, back to you.
Right, Edward, let me also ask you to just talk about the relationship between the two countries and why any change in this equation has serious and far-reaching implications for the entire region.
It has those implications precisely for the intro that you provided, the very comprehensive and accurate introduction that you provided. These are the two behemoths in the Middle East, Iran and Saudi Arabia. These are the two large dynamic force factors in the Middle East, and you correctly pointed out to the schism. There you have the Shiite Saudi schism, and you have a power schism here. Turkey, of course, is another, is the third power factor. But Turkey, again, a Sunni state like Saudi Arabia. And we have to understand another dynamic here that we cannot overlook. It cannot be overlooked in some type of, popping champagne corks about diplomatic relations and things like this that cannot be covered. And that's Iran's nuclear program. The diplomatic relations will not eliminate Saudi concern over Iran obtaining a nuclear weapon. And anyone who thinks that, oh, well, gee, this China broker deal, again, no doubt financially driven because, again, China simply will not mention anything about human rights. And I have to differ slightly with the respected other guests that the United States does care about these issues. It balances its relationship with the Saudis, but President Biden released the CIA report that fingered MSB for the killing, and only with great reluctance did the fist bump, the famous fist bump. And we know how much in MBS, Mohammed bin Salman resents that, just this fist bump, and how much that spite drives this relationship. So human rights are a factor in the relationship. MBS likes the fact, Mohammed bin Salman, that China doesn't care about any of these human rights issues, and we don't even need to speak about Iran. Again, the U.S. and its EU allies are very concerned about how Iran treats its own people, its own citizens. And China, again, couldn't care. Why? Because China does the same within China. And I should underscore here one other irony, permit me. China is the worst abuser of the human rights of Muslims in the world. So you have these two so-called promoters and defenders of the Islamic faith, Iran and of course Saudi, which we're home of Mecca, being pulled into agreement when it is China that interns over 1 million Muslim Uyghurs solely because of their Muslim religion, amounting to what the United States has called genocide and what some UN agencies have called crimes against humanity. So tremendous irony here, and again,
consistency as well. Edward, I'm sorry to interrupt you there. Just hold that thought. There are some breaking inputs coming in right this minute as we have been talking about how America will be viewing these developments and talking about the reactions trickling in. Just a few moments ago, we've gotten this reaction with the White House welcoming the Iran-Saudi deal. That's the latest input that we have at this point. But at the same time, the statement goes on to say that it is skeptical that Tehran will be meeting the obligations, quote unquote. Adnan, if you can quickly comment on this, what do you make of the statement?
Well, I mean, as I said, it's going to be interesting to watch. I mean, the things that are outlined in the statement, the reference to documents that were already developed and signed in 1998 and 2001 between the two countries, are in fact seem to be a parallel universe to what we see today, with these two countries doing significant harm to each other, or at least have been doing significant harm to each other in the past. And of course, there has to be caution, there has to be skepticism towards whether this will all really and truly materialize. So that's why I wouldn't be surprised. I think it's a wise thing to do. I really think nobody is popping up champagne bottles, particularly because we're talking about two Muslim countries here. There is no festive mood, but there is at least, and I think this is granted, a moment of appreciation for a diplomatic breakthrough, something that can lead to a bit of a geopolitical shift in the region if it really materializes and moves on like this. So that is the real question. But again, there are different indicators we will have to really look at and wait and see a bit.
Indeed. Edward, what's your reading of the reaction coming in from the White House? Does it come along expected lines?
I think this is, they're putting the best face on it. And in a way that it's correct. And I agree here with the other speaker that there is some potential here, for example, for de-escalation in Yemen. That part is positive, that the long-suffering people of Yemen could perhaps see some improvement in their lives if Iran and Saudi have this rapprochement. Similarly, in Syria, there could be improvement in the lives of Syrian citizens who've been battered by the fact that Iran has supported this brutal regime of Bashar Assad. So those in those two things, if you get de-escalation, rapprochement between Saudi Arabia and Iran, the citizens of those two countries could benefit from that reduction in tensions. But again, we have obstacles here that I do not see this again as some brave new era of peace. Again, the biggest stumbling block, Iran's nuclear program, which it shows no indication whatsoever of wanting to give up. And this is not something that you can just have rapprochement about. This is a fundamental threat. Saudi and its Gulf neighbors are simply inherently threatened by the fact of Iran being so close to having a nuclear weapon. And any country in the world can see the behavior in Russia towards Ukraine, the behavior of North Korea, how dangerous it is when a regime like this, an autocratic, brutal dictatorial regime, obtains a nuclear weapon, how aggressive they can become to their neighbors. And what a menace they are. And that will not go away simply because they exchange embassies. And again, forgive me for the champagne corks, but that type of euphoria, it does not conceal this. And again, we have to remember we're talking about a broker here, China, that doesn't care about any of those issues, doesn't care, only wants its oil, as the other speaker correctly said, wants oil to flow, doesn't care about what happens to Iranian citizens, doesn't care about anything in Saudi and the kingdom internally, only cares about its oil and its own influence in the region. And that's why, again, these type of agreements, they catch a lot of attention, but we have to really understand the dynamics, the underlying dynamics that bring Saudi and Iran into conflict and into tension. Please.
Right, Edward and Adnan, we're leaving it there for the moment. Thanks very much, gentlemen, for joining us on Gravitas and helping us decode the implications of China brokering those talks between two regional rivals and the implications of these developments for the region. Thanks very much. Moving on for now, our other top focus tonight is about an unlikely alliance. An alliance between the Chinese Communist Party, the Italian mafia, and Russian oligarchs. You heard me right. The Chinese establishment, in cahoots with the Italian mafia and sanctioned oligarchs from Russia, has for years been running an extensive money laundering network. A network that involves underground banks, secret agents, brokers, and billions of dollars worth of dirty money. It runs from the offices of the Communist Party in Beijing to the many secret hideouts of criminal syndicates in Italy. And this secret network has now been busted. According to reports, the Italian tax police, or Guardia di Finanza, has blown the lid off this nexus through a secret investigation, an investigation that they called, ironically enough, Operation Silk Road. Let me just break down the most telling discoveries from this investigation. Number one, Chinese officials are secretly running what they describe as underground banks in Italy. Underground banks. Number two, these banks help Chinese citizens living in Italy send money back to the mainland through third parties. And number three, these third parties operate in Eastern Europe, mostly in countries where Chinese influence is strong. And number four, from these countries, this money is sent to China or sent to Chinese banks directly. And number five, this helps Chinese citizens living in Italy evade paying taxes, VAT, or social security. And that's not even all. These banks are also used by criminals, dishonest business persons, and the Italian mafia. Let me tell you more. Instead of paying directly to their clients, like drug suppliers, they use these banks to send money to China. And from China, this money is then transferred to drug barons in Colombia, who supply cocaine and other drugs to their Italian associates. And that's not even all. These banks are also used by Russian oligarchs, especially those close to Vladimir Putin, who have been sanctioned by the West. Since they cannot legally export money from Russia to Italy or from Italy to Russia, they are using these banks to funnel money to other European countries. I know some of these details may be a little complicated to wrap your head around, so let me just put this very simply for you. China is running a Hawala network in Italy, a network that involves the use of brokers to facilitate illegal transfer of money. And this operation was one of the largest in Italian history. It has been underway for over 6 years. 6 years of tracing these banks and catching the brokers. Some of these arrests even made headlines. Turns out they were all linked to this operation. Take this one, for instance. It's from January 2020. This is when police at Rome's Fiumicino airport confiscated 3 million euros from 2 Chinese businessmen. These businessmen were attempting to return to China, but they were nabbed. And in August 2022, the tax police arrested an architect, a man who had designed a luxury estate for the Russian president. He was accused of breaking Italy's tax rules and trying to launder $144 million. Turns out he was working for China's underground banks to help Russian oligarchs. And the very next month, in September 2022, at least 22 people were arrested in the Italian city of Brescia. They were accused of tax evasion and money laundering. And now it turns out this money was being laundered to China. And why just Italy? On the 4th of August last year, Britain's National Crime Agency arrested a 33-year-old Chinese national. He was suspected of being part of an underground Chinese banking network. And now we know which network the report mentioned. These were just 4 instances, and there are many more arrests in many more countries. But you get the whole point. China's underground banks are helping criminals and its own nationals living abroad evade the law. Just have a look at these figures. According to the Italian tax police, lawful transfers of money from Chinese residents in Italy back to China have declined drastically. In 2017, these transfers stood at 5 billion euros, and by 2021, they had decreased to just 9 million euros. Courtesy China's underground banks. All said and done, the big question is, who operates these banks? Are they Chinese citizens or Chinese politicians? Well, if we go by the investigation, it seems this entire operation is running with the blessings of the CCP. Because the investigators, you see, have traced the money trail to a pool of banks led by the Bank of China, the fourth largest bank in the world, which is strongly in the hands of the CCP. So those responsible for running these underground banks are by all means from the Chinese Communist Party. The question is, will this expose have any bearing on Europe's ties with China? That is a question the people of Europe must ask their leaders. On to some grim news coming in from India. Just a few days ago, we told you about the rise in number of flu cases in the country, the H3N2 flu. The spike in cases has led to growing concern, triggering fears of a silent epidemic. The H3N2 influenza has now claimed the lives of 2 people in India. These are the first deaths reported caused by the virus in India. One death was reported in Haryana, the other death was reported in Karnataka. In Haryana, a 56-year-old lung cancer patient has died, according to reports. He tested positive for H3N2 in January. In Karnataka, the 82-year-old man who died was admitted to hospital on the 24th of February. As per reports, he was a diabetic and suffered from hypertension. The Union Health Minister has asked the states to be on alert and closely monitor the developments, the situation in view of the rising cases. The ministry is also tracking and keeping a close watch on morbidity and mortality due to the subtype of the seasonal influenza. From the 2nd of January to the 5th of March, 451 cases of H3N2 have been reported in the country, according to the Health Ministry. And the ministry says young children and old age persons with comorbidities are the most vulnerable groups in the context of this seasonal influenza. First things first, what is the H3N2 flu? What are the symptoms? What can you do to protect yourself? The H3N2 virus is a type of influenza virus that can cause respiratory illness in human beings. It is a subtype of the influenza A virus and has been responsible for several influenza outbreaks in the past. What are the symptoms? Fever, cough, sore throat, runny or stuffy nose, body aches, headache, chills, fatigue. In some cases, people may also experience vomiting and diarrhea. The symptoms usually last for around a week, but some people may also experience them for longer. I know this again sounds quite similar to the Wuhan virus symptoms. So how do you know that it is not the Wuhan virus? Well, it can be difficult to differentiate between COVID-19 and the flu caused by H3N2 without a test, as both illnesses share symptoms like fever, cough, body ache. What can you do to protect yourself? The H3N2 influenza is highly contagious and the precautionary measures are similar to the ones for COVID-19. It is important to wash your hands with soap and water regularly. Use an alcohol-based hand sanitizer if you are unable to wash your hands. Avoid touching your face, and that includes your eyes, nose and mouth. Keep frequently touched surfaces clean to avoid picking up the virus from them. Avoid congested areas and keep your distance from those who are ill. And remember to do your bit to protect others if you are unwell. Do not go to work if you are experiencing some symptoms. Cover your mouth when coughing or sneezing. Stay safe and keep others safe. Doctors also say it is advisable for those at risk that is people with comorbidities, diabetes, hypertension, to take the flu vaccine every year. And let's now take you to Afghanistan, where more extreme forces have risen to fight the extreme. I'm talking about what happened just last evening. A Taliban governor was killed in a suicide attack. It happened in the Balkh province. Do you see the irony here? For the longest time, the Taliban were the ones killing others. In fact, they still are. But what has changed here is that now there is a terror group hunting the hardliners. The Taliban governor who died was Mohammad Dawood Muzammil. He was in his office in the provincial capital of Mazar-e-Sharif. That is when the suicide bomber detonated himself. Muzammil is not the first Taliban official to have been killed in the last couple of years, and chances are he will not be the last. The question is, who is coming for the Taliban? And we will answer that in just a bit. First, a little recap here. The Taliban emerged in the 1990s with a promise to restore peace and security, also enforce their version of the Sharia law. In 1996, the Taliban captured the Afghan capital. In 2001, the American forces invaded Afghanistan. In 2021, the Taliban ensured the same American forces fled the country in the shadows of the night. What happens then? A force more extreme rose to fight the Taliban. In April, a local Taliban leader and his security guard were targeted. ISIS-K, ISIS Khorasan, planted an IED under the vehicle of the Taliban leader. In August 2022, there was a blast in Kabul. In September, there was a blast outside a mosque in Herat. 18 people lost their lives. Among them was a Taliban cleric. His name was Majib Rahman Ansari. You see, they are not coincidences. The Taliban has become the target in Afghanistan. According to one estimate, there have been at least 220 remote explosive and suicide attacks targeting the Taliban leaders. So, who is targeting the Taliban? The ISIS-K, the Islamic State Khorasan. You see, it struck the Taliban very early into its second stint. Who remembers the Kabul airport blast? So what does the ISIS-K really want? It wants to drive the Taliban out of Afghanistan because the ISIS-K believes that the Taliban's beliefs are not extreme enough. Let's just remind you here that the Taliban has banned women from public life, universities, colleges, salons, parks. The Taliban is cracking down on international NGOs, foreign media. But none of that is extreme enough or conservative enough for the ISIS-K. Also, the two groups disagree over nationalism. You see, the Taliban wants to rule all of Afghanistan, and the ISIS opposes the very idea of nationalism. And now that the Taliban is losing control of Afghanistan, now that the many political, social and economic problems have come back to bite the Taliban regime, now that the Taliban have exposed themselves by failing to address Afghanistan's basic issues like poverty, hunger, the ISIS-K is now trying to turn the tide against the Taliban. Did you know, as per one estimate, 90% of Afghans do not have enough to eat? Afghans are becoming more and more fed up with the Taliban, and this is working in favor of the ISIS Khorasan because the frustrated youth in the country are joining the ranks of the ISIS-K to fight the Taliban. So what can the Taliban do about this? In one word, nothing. The ISIS-K may have just a fraction of fighters compared to the Taliban, but the latter does not even have the most basic resources to finance a counter-insurgency operation. The hardliners have no money to take on a more extreme group. And what does that mean? What really do these suicide attacks mean? that this may be just the beginning of another prolonged war, that there is no peace in sight in Afghanistan. And whom do you blame? The Taliban or the ISIS-K? They are not the only villains in this story. You see, the Americans are responsible as well. So are its allies who fought in this war-torn country. They convinced the people, they lied to themselves that peace will be able to flow from the barrel of the gun. And what happened after 20 years of war? What happened after the Civil War? Just look at where Afghanistan is today. They say truth hurts. Here in India, we saw this play out live on Twitter. Case in point being a humble advertisement. Indian matchmaking website Bharat Matrimony has come under fire. A debate has broken out on Twitter. Hashtag boycott Bharat Matrimony is trending. It has been accused of hurting religious sentiments, all because of an ad. Let me break it down for you. The video features a woman. She is covered in colors after Holi celebrations. She is seen washing her face, only to reveal a face smeared with bruises. What was the motive of this ad? To highlight harassment faced by women on Holi. But the message was grossly misunderstood. Why is that? Isn't harassing women on Holi a reality? And why just Holi? Women in India will tell you stories of harassment that they face on a daily basis, Holi or not, in their own homes and outside. Speaking of which, let me show you some numbers here. According to the latest National Family Health Survey, 30% married Indian women have faced domestic or sexual violence. 3% of pregnant women experience physical violence during any pregnancy. The number of domestic violence cases in India almost doubled between 2001 and 2018, almost doubled. And these are just the cases that have been reported, by the way. Very important to remember. More than 77% of women stay mum about violence. More than 77%. That's domestic abuse. Let's just talk about harassment on Holi. Recently, a 65-year-old woman was beaten to death in Jharkhand, in India. Why is that? Because she stopped a group of 6 from applying color to her son. So how exactly was the ad wrong in raising awareness about this issue? And why are people so triggered? Why so much sensitivity around a prevalent problem? Let's have a look at some comments. I'm quoting, "It's disappointing to see that you are equating our festivals with harassment." That's what one of the users said. I'm quoting from another reaction. "You guys are absolutely disgusting. How dare you link a social message with the Hindu festival of Holi?" This is not an attack on religion. This is about targeting a festival. Also, since we are clarifying, the purpose of this story is to not issue a defense on behalf of Bharat Matrimony. It is about exposing the denial that people seem to be living in. Such denial of reality that they are ready to smear creativity or expression with religious colors to hide the real truth. The truth about harassment that women face on a daily basis. It seems to me that netizens react in extremes if they see anything other than a sanitized image of India's reality. And which explains why food and grocery deliverer Swiggy was also trolled this week. Again, over an ad. A billboard advertisement. Let's just look at what it was all about. The billboard had a checklist relating to eggs. It checked off omelette and sunny side up, but put a cross against throwing eggs on someone's head. something which is often observed on Holi. As soon as the billboards were up, tweets with hashtag Hindu-phobic Swiggy started flooding the internet. Users urged others to boycott Swiggy. All this for what? For raising awareness around safe Holi celebrations? Are people really that intolerant? Have a look at these visuals. Have a look at the boys smashing eggs on this little girl's head. How fair was the criticism against Swiggy then? It ultimately had to take down the advertisements, by the way. And where does it leave freedom of expression? The question might seem redundant because trigger points are subjective, but recent incidents have pointed towards a gross intolerance among people. Instead of ignoring what doesn't align with their views, people turn to boycotting and cancel culture. Something similar happened with Tanishq as well, the Tanishq ad, when the jewelry brand featured an interfaith couple. What does it mean? Will creative outlets keep coming under the bus for remotely referring to religion, even on views meant to raise awareness? If you don't like an ad, don't see it. If you don't like a product, don't buy it. If you have a problem with Bharat matrimony, find your partner elsewhere. If you hate Swiggy, buy your eggs from the Kirana store or any other online store. If you have a lot of time to waste, try doing something meaningful for a change. Just stop making an issue of just about everything. What do you think the world would look like in the future? Do you imagine levitating trains, quantum computers, groundbreaking medical equipment, or massive energy savings? It sounds like something from a science fiction film, does it not? But what if I told you we might be one step closer to achieving these feats? Scientists have now made a groundbreaking advance in superconductivity. Their paper has made it through the peer review process at the prestigious journal Nature. The research group says it is close to developing a superconductor which would work at room temperatures. Pay attention to my words here. Room temperatures. Because that makes all the difference here. You see, superconductivity was discovered over a century ago. Physicists found materials in which electrical resistance magically disappears. These are known as superconductors. Usually, electric flow encounters resistance as it moves through wires, and this is almost like a form of friction. Some energy is always lost in this process. But that is not the case with superconductors. These materials can effortlessly convey electricity, effortlessly, without any resistance or energy loss. They are used in particle accelerators, generators, electric motors, and MRI scans as well. Superconductors have been around for years now. Then what is the fuss all about regarding this new discovery claim? Let me explain it to you. These materials lose their resistance only under special conditions. They become active only below a specific temperature, meaning that they are functional in unearthly, ultra-cold environment and incredibly high pressure, and this has always limited their practical applications. They have been effective, no doubt, but it's difficult, expensive, also energy intensive to maintain a suitable environment. For decades now, scientists have sought superconductors that work at room temperatures, and now they are close to developing them. Let's see how. The new superconductor consists of lutetium hydrogen and a little bit of nitrogen, but there is a hiccup here. It needs to be compressed before gaining its superconducting prowess. How much? Well, it requires a pressure of 145,000 pounds per square inch. That is about 10 times the pressure exerted at an ocean's deepest trenches. Now, this is not a low figure. But let's compare it with the previous results, just for some context. The same team released a paper in 2020, which was later retracted after its data was questioned. And in that study, the superconductor required over 100 times the pressure needed by the new one. Over 100 times. It was comparable to the crushing forces found several thousand miles within our planet. And seeing that the new study comes as a sigh of relief, it has rekindled hopes. The new material is superconducting at much lower temperatures, much lower pressures. Other research groups will also be able to reproduce the experiment, and scientists now believe that one day a superconductor could work at normal atmospheric pressure. While the current one needs a very high pressure, it shows superconductivity at 21 degrees Celsius. Meaning at room temperatures, it does not require an ultra-cool environment. The procedure followed yields positive results 1 out of 3 times, and this comes as a big victory for physicists. And on that note, it's a wrap on this edition of Gravitas tonight. We're leaving you with Gravitas images. Thanks very much for watching. Have a good weekend.
Right.